Hi, John. How are you?
Hey, Irina, I'm very good indeed, thank you. And yourself?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. I'm currently in Vietnam, so no complaints. Living the remote work life, I suppose. Very on brand with our show. Where are you
Excellent,
today?
excellent. Unfortunately, I'm at home, but as soon as this finishes, I am heading to the south of France for a couple of days. So, yeah,
Amazing, amazing.
I'll be living your dream, but a little bit after you.
Excellent. Well, as we were talking just before we started recording, one of the reasons why I do this, I hope to piss off people and also inspire them to do this. Of course, if they have the option from their workplaces to just kind of go away for a week or a month or whatever it allows, and just see something new. It's definitely a life I enjoy. But anyways, hybrid chats. First episode of the year. Last time you and I were talking about what we made of 2023, what were the highlights, what we expected of 2024. Here we are, end of Jan, when we're recording this, and there's already really interesting things. So firstly, we're going to kick off with something that I think both you and I are very excited about. It came out earlier in the month. It's a company called Atlassian. For those who may have never heard of it, it's a project management maker of various tools. It's been around for a while. And about 1,000 days ago, which would coincide with about the start of COVID or thereabouts, they decided to go full on distributed. They didn't have an option because of regulations, and then they just decided to ride the wave. And after 1,000 days, they decided to write a report about how it's been, what they've learned, what works for them, what doesn't. And it's a really, really interesting read. I definitely recommend everyone listening in to have a read. But I'm curious, what stood out for you, John?
Oh God, everything. You know what, Irina, what stood out for me is the absolute transparency of what they've done. And they've shared. I mean, it really is almost the Bible of how to do remote work because they've shared a bunch of things that they've done, and then they've shared the results of 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 their work. And to me, it's a fascinating insight in how to do it. So just before anybody kind of gets wrapped around the axle, Atlassian still has offices, and they've kept offices, but they've kept them for a very specific reason as gathering points. What they've worked out in their stuff is that it's a myth that you're going to get more. To me, this is the key finding. There's a big fat myth out there that if you mandate office days, that you will actually drive productivity and that you will drive connection. They've actually found out from their research that mandating office days does not do that. But that doesn't mean that they don't actually have days when they connect. They do have a significant number of team gatherings, a significant number of social gatherings, and they have found that those organic connections and also organic connections foster a really interesting sort of connective tissue. And typically, what they're seeing is that for 4 or 5 months after they have these in-person meetings, the level of connection is significantly higher. And I think that's a really important finding for everybody. So, we all know that getting together in person is a good thing. They've actually provided some information on that. Another key one is that that classic thing about presence doesn't equal productivity, and you know Atlassian has always focused on outputs and not clock hours, and they've showed that in the information. But from a measuring of success, because a lot of people will cut to the bottom line and say, well, what has it done for them? Well, they're 57% of the new hires in the past year at Atlassian were fully remote. So what that has shown is that they've really tapped into this, let's call it the global talent pool. So they've really spread their ability to get a diverse group of people. So that's a huge success. They've also, when when they polled their employees, 92% of employees have said that flexibility is an essential part for them to do their best work. 92%, that's an enormous number. And also 91% say it's a key factor in their decision to stay with the company. So the determination from Atlassian is that flexibility drives success. Now, let's go to the last point in this, which is, so what does that do for Atlassian as a company? Well, Atlassian climbed an incredible 40 spots on the Fortune 100 best companies to work for list just in 1 year. They went from 47th to 7th. And I don't think any other stat there underscores quite as impressively the unbelievable positive impact of their approach.
Yeah, no, it's quite spectacular. There's a lot of numbers in there for the number nerds that are listening. There's brilliant numbers. They've had in the last 1,000 days 1,600 team gatherings. So that's what 1.6 a day kind of thing. They have had 5,000 social gatherings attended. So there's definitely no lack of connection. Going to the office has been by choice, and they talk about, say, the co-founders would be in New York doing an AMA, and then loads of people within the vicinity would come to the office and just hang out and spend time together. What I really loved about the entire report, and again, I can't emphasize strongly enough that everyone should give it a read. Anyone that's in a managerial role, in a leadership role, like I, as a head of marketing, need to make sure that my team is connected. And there were some really granular ideas in there and advice. So it's not just wishy-washy. One thing I loved is how they say that the ideal split of a work week should be. And I quote, they say, make sure that about 30% of time is meetings, 10 to 20% open collaboration. And they emphasize when it's open collaboration, put it in your calendar, block it as a time. Don't put calls in there, but this is like anyone can come to you and talk to you. And usually you'd want to do this in time zones where you know that other people that you work with are also working. So it's like in this 3-4 hours point where time zones meet, then 30 to 40% focus time, and it really needs to be focus time, and then about 20%, but no more, of answering messages. So answering Slacks, answering emails. I love this, and just this idea of this is about being intentional. And there's a lovely thing that they say where when the where doesn't matter, the how really starts mattering. So they have flexibility in terms of the days, the time, the time of day, the geography, but they are quite prescriptive in the how, and this is how connection also happens. And you and I have seen this time and time again. Hybrid works better for connection than in the office, because the difference is the intentionality of, we're in the office now, or we're wherever we are, we're going to be intentional about how we spend this time, rather than we're just in the office and we're going to wait for serendipity. They're kind of against serendipity. They're kind of against just spontaneity. They're like, no, you have to be intentional.
I agree with you totally. And look, there's a couple of key facts here. We've said this before, but the genie's out of the bottle that remote work or people working from home, it has worked since the pandemic, but not for everybody and not for every company. So like this whole fact that the nature of a modern company is that it's a distributed workforce, that's a proven point. So companies need to tap into that. What's the best way to do that? Another point is that you don't need an office to do great work. However, that doesn't mean that an office doesn't matter. So how do you, to your point about intentionality, how do you incorporate the office in a manner in which it becomes an intentional thing? And what I just was saying there about Atlassian, one of the key things that they've done is assigned, I wouldn't say a metric, but a measurement of sorts as to how critical in-person time is. So those of us who've worked for major international companies, historically, all these companies will get the different departmental teams or executive teams together once a quarter. what Atlassian has done is essentially prove the point that getting the teams together stretches that level of connection for 4 to 5 months afterwards. That's a critical piece of data. And I would encourage people to lean into that. And, another one is, you were just saying it there in terms of the kind of the intentionality of work. If the point is you want to boost productivity, then you have to innovate on how the work gets done. So encouraging people to, as you said, that kind of 30-10-50 split and stuff like that, you have to keep on iterating and keep on measuring. But to me, this is the Atlassian. What I love about it is the absolute transparency of it, number one, the depth of the information, number two, the fact that they're leading from the front, number three. And I would encourage everybody, as you just said, to download the report. Also, some of the key executives in Atlassian are well worth following on social. Annie Dean, who is, to me, probably the most authentic leader in this space, who's head of remote for Atlassian, is a real oracle in this space. So huge props to Atlassian for a fantastic piece of work. I think it will probably become the pillar piece of work on an annual basis. It's almost a state of the nation.
Absolutely, I agree with you. There's a lot of self-awareness in there, and there's a lot of, just observing and measuring and tracking, and really like I can't get over like the little bits of advice. Like if you're having a collaborative session, start with a question, because that's going to bring people together. It's like they go extremely granular. But I wonder, you see this report, what would be, if you see all of these things and you're a company that's kind of trying to get distributed better, what would be the first few things that you take as inspiration, that you would apply in your organization?
That's a great question. Like, it's kind of like, where do you start?
Where do you
And
start? Yeah.
I think you start by listening to the employee group and working out what works best for them. And it's unlikely to be 100% office based. So wherever your team is on that continuum, it might be, 30% want to be in the office. That's fine. That's great. That's wonderful. Work around that. So then how do you incorporate the other 70% or 50, whatever the number is? But listen to the employee group to find out what works best for them to do their best work. Then iterate around that to see, are there ways in which you can get the best work to be even better work? And then to build that level of intentionality in terms of the meetups, so that you're fostering that connection. The other thing that I hear on a regular basis, is you cannot mentor and you cannot school younger employees remotely.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that's a big one.
that's the view. That to me is the viewpoint of people who haven't done it. So imagine a world where companies, and Atlassian is one of those. There's tons of other examples of companies that have gone to essentially a fully distributed model. They've conquered all of those things. So for the companies whose starting point is, no, we can't because that doesn't work, go and have a look at the evidence. Go and have a look at the people like Atlassian and GitHub and GitLab and a whole variety of other, Shopify, all of these companies who have shared what they've done, and go and try something. Don't be stuck with the status quo.
Totally. And that was going to be my other question. Like, as you read this, like I read this, and obviously Boundless was born remote, and we're big believers in allowing people to work from wherever it suits them without having to compensate on any rights or benefits or anything. So clearly I'm biased, but I read this and I think this is it's almost like a prescription. Like any company can take this and can make this successful. It's not this impossible thing reserved for the few. It's doable, and that's the great message from the report. You too can do this.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, this is the roadmap, and it should be the point of encouragement. It is not an argumentative piece. It is not to say that in office is bad and working from home is good, because that's not the case at all.
No.
The real question for all companies is, how do I mix the two in a way in which I get the best possible result? Now, I do have some sympathy for some very large organizations where the vast majority of employees have to be in a physical location and have to be, for example, in retail where you're in front of the customer. Do you then allow the quote unquote 10% of people who work in behind the scenes? Should those people be afforded the opportunity to work in a distributed manner? And I would actually lean into yes, they should. Do you need to have payroll driving into? Do you need a payroll organization, for example, for an airline to drive to the airport, park in in a large building in an airport to actually do payroll when we know that can be done at home? We know it, right? There's so many of these administrative type functions that can be distributed. So pick those pockets of work, and guess what? Trust that you're going to be able to get some of the best talent available, because you will. If you have the right culture and the right manner in which you execute distributed work, you'll find the right talent and the best
Yep,
talent.
no, that's it. That's it. So we know flexible work works, at least as far as Atlassian goes. They have 10,000 people that are
Mm-hmm.
doing a great job. But let's move on to a report that we have to see where are people actually working. So you and I have spoken before about the Flex report, which has been coming out for about a year. It's up until this point tracked mainly the US or mostly on only the US. But they've just come out early this year with the first iteration of a non-US data set, and they looked at the UK. They looked about 3 million employees, if I'm correct, and then they compared what they saw in the UK with what they've been saying in the US. There's a couple of really interesting things for me, but I'm also really curious what you think of that. So basically, on a couple of the points, the UK is tracking better than the US. So overall, companies offering flexibility in the UK, we have 72% of companies, while in the US that's at 62%. And then in terms of offering structured hybrid rather than in office, we have 44% in the UK, over 26% in the US. And then there's a couple of other data points we'll get to in a second where they're kind of similar. But what do you think about this? Why do you think UK seems to be tracking better than the US?
Um, it boils down to probably the relative size of the UK. So
Mm.
the UK being a more condensed, more population dense and condensed country, it's an advantage because it's so much easier and so much more time efficient and cost efficient and effective to pull together one of those in-person meetings for a workforce that's distributed in the US rather than a workforce distributed across, for example, the UK versus the US, or the UK versus Canada, UK versus Australia, much larger land masses. It's just more difficult and more awkward. So I think the UK has that advantage, and the data would indicate that no matter what is being said at the boardroom level, no matter what is being said with these RTO, return to office mandates, that the rank and file companies are actually executing rather well the concept of work location flexibility. And to me, it boils down to the relative size of the country. It's doable. You can get
Yep.
people together a lot easier.
Yep. No, that's it. Is there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, look, I'm pleasantly surprised overall at the results. Um, where I'm not surprised at all, I'll answer that first of all, is the correlation between kind of large companies and flexibility. Large companies have, and we've seen this in the US and in other markets, large companies which are typically older companies, they have more quote unquote fixed assets like property and whatever. And as a result of that, they're they are without a doubt slower moving due to their size because they're encumbered with these assets and it's hard to change very quickly. So that's one area where I'm not surprised. But one area where I'm actually disappointed is in the UK government function. So this is another thing that showed up in the report. So the UK government is really a significant laggard in terms of the adoption of remote work. So you see companies like in the tech space, you see 97% of companies offering elements of flexibility, and it graduates all the way down, and you see quite a number of industries in the 90s and the 80s, and then a few kind of lower retail ones lower, and then you see this one way behind, government 34%. Like there are so many functions that governments around the world have actually mastered in doing remotely. There are, I'm talking about everything from driver's license applications to passport applications to tax returns to a whole variety of things, which are administrative in nature. They are tailor-made to be in essentially to be managed and operated by a distributed workforce, which have historically not attracted high caliber people. And now you have the opportunity to give employee benefits, as in a benefit of working in a distributed manner and a constant workflow to people. And it actually boosts society. Yet the UK government does not seem to have embraced it. So to me, the big black eye in this report, or the big black eye that's shown in this report, is the laggard nature of the UK government. It's not
Okay, okay.
surprising given, and it wouldn't surprise us, Irina, given some of the bleatings that we've heard out of various UK government departments over the last 2 years. But let's flip it around. That is an enormous opportunity as well. There's another aspect of it where that is an enormous opportunity, is that in many countries, the concentration of those sort of bureaucratic roles tends to be in the capital cities. And by regionalizing those or distributing those workforces around the country, you're actually putting more of the jobs back into the areas where economic development isn't happening as fast. So to me, it's not a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged opportunity to actually distribute those jobs around the country, put them back in the communities, and also free up spaces and housing in some of the major cities. Huge opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But out of curiosity, over the grapevines, have you heard of any country where the trend is kind of better in terms of governmental jobs being more remote?
It's not an area of expertise of mine, to be honest with you, but I've being a US citizen and an Irish citizen, I have a fair amount of experience dealing with those two, let's say, bureaucracies. And what I've seen with for example, the Irish tax authorities, most of the people are now working from home, and the speed at which tax returns are what you call it, enacted or settled, be it the payment or the refund, is staggeringly fast. Another one is things that I'm exposed to in Ireland versus the US would be, like, and I mentioned it a second ago, passport applications and driving license applications. In both countries, driver's license applications in both countries are now fully automated and online, and it's fantastic service, absolutely superb. Passport applications, still a bit of a labyrinthine process in the US. Ireland, rapid. And again, it's down to the application. There's a passport office in the town I live in. There's a passport office on the main street. And Irina, whenever I pass down the street, I look into the passport office. There's space for about 70 or 80 people to queue up, because that's what you had to do in the old days. In the past 3.5 years, I have never seen more than one person in the passport office, other than the 4 or 5 booths where there are people sitting, waiting all day long for people to come in to process a passport in person. What that says to me, and that's just research of one, but that tells me that the vast majority of people are actually processing their passports electronically, digitally, remotely, whatever way you want to describe it. So there's opportunity there, and there must be there are massive opportunities elsewhere in all these government functions to enable distributed work. And like I said, that then frees up a lot of space in the major cities, and that will actually solve housing issues, blah blah. There's so many. The mushroom cloud impact of proper government distribution, I think, is a key point.
There you go. There you go. So Ireland is doing better. So definitely, we can encourage other governments to have a look, and they could certainly talk to you. You know a thing or two about Ireland. We can do a flex report on Ireland.
Too small, but the other thing that came up actually in the Flex report that's well worth digging into is the small companies and technology companies, and which companies are the types that jump into work location flexibility. And like I said earlier on, technology companies do lead significantly in this, and also small companies lead. So by what you can imply in that is smaller technology companies, let's call that the startup ecosystem, tend to be the companies that are completely flexible, or to a large part flexible. What will be very interesting, and we're all looking into the crystal ball here. What will be very interesting is, will these small technology companies these technology companies that are still small, that are in the startup phase, will they be the behemoths of 15 years time? Will they be the Googles and the Metas and the Apples? Likely, the answer is likely yes. There will be a few of them who will be leading, and my bet, Irina, is that in 10 or 15 years time, we will have a couple of the companies that are leading the world. Let's call it the top 10 technology companies in the world. There will be one or two of those companies that are essentially a fully distributed workforce, and that's the kind of stuff that encourages me tremendously. So hopefully the Flex report is something that will spread to other countries, because the world is not just the US and the UK. And I would also mention that on the 15th of February, so about 2 weeks' time, there is a panel discussion on the Flex report that features a couple of key people in the arena, including Nick Bloom, talking about various elements of the Flex report, and that's open to everybody. And it's a really interesting 1 hour segment on, I suppose, the future of flexible working.
Excellent. We'll definitely pop a link to that event. But yeah, I agree with you. And certainly Atlassian, it may not be a behemoth right now, but 10,000 people are working distributed right now and seems to be doing okay for the company. So we'll definitely keep a track on that. But speaking of large companies, another thing we have this month is an article in Fortune about Bank of America massively reducing office space. Now, this isn't a thing that's happened in the last month or in the last year. This has actually been happening for about 15 years. But it's interesting that it makes news now. And the numbers there of reducing space are quite staggering. What did you think of that, John?
I think staggering is probably an enormous understatement. So, just to kind of set the table here for a second.
Please do.
Bank of America, probably 15 years ago, Bank of America would have had about 100 million square foot of office space in the US. 100 million. And they've shrunk that from 100 million square feet to 60. So 40 million square feet, which is quite a huge jump. But they're not stopping there, and they're actually reevaluating the entire portfolio to see, from a property by property perspective, do we need to shrink our use of that particular property, or do we need to abandon it? And what they've said, what Brian Moynihan, the CEO, has said, is that because of the lease commitments that they have, they've got to take a very measured approach, because the average lease that they would have is probably 5 or more years. And then there's a significant concern from a market perspective, is that the subletting business, which was the kind of, how to describe it, it was the pressure release valve in the property world. There is almost no subletting market available in most markets. So that's probably the biggest tell of future challenges, is when there's no subletting market, you're kind of screwed with that. So, as I said, they've already shrunk, and a lot of other companies are looking at them. So you take a couple of other large finance organizations and real estate companies in the US. Fannie Mae is a big one, Wells Fargo, another big bank, Cushman and Wakefield, who are one of the big real estate companies. And all of those are looking very closely at offloading large amounts of office space, office square footage as well. So I think at this stage, Irina, it's safe to say that a pattern is emerging, that where most occupiers believe, occupiers of large volumes of office space, they believe that they probably have too much space, given the newly distributed workforce and workplace that now exists. So neither of us are experts in corporate real estate, but to me, this is an ongoing warning sign. And the CEOs who are out there in front of it, and I hat tip to Brian Moynihan from Bank of America, who's their CEO. Those who are out in front of it and talking about it publicly, I think it's good, rather than sticking the head in the sand and hoping it goes away.
Yeah, and that's what sticks from me, like really comes out from this, is, we've talked about this before. A lot of the mandates come as a result of these companies have these large real estate, whether leased or owned or whatever it is, and it's like, to justify the fact that they have them, they make people come to the office. While what we see Bank of America is doing is actually keeping an eye and an ear for what people are doing, and then adjusting based on that. You can't change the reality that people want to work in a distributed fashion. So you could make people come to the office, not piss them off and not have them very happy about that, or you can just start peeling and removing some of that office space, and you kind of have to go either way. So I'm curious, like, as you read this, do you think that there are other, because obviously when you're a small company, when you don't have a lot of off space, it's easier. But do you think there's, CEOs of other large corporations, be they financial or other, that are reading this and are, beginning to see the point here that maybe it's time to stop trying to change people's behavior and instead, change some of the leases that they have on?
It's kind of all over the place, because even this week alone, UPS, it was reported that UPS has mandated that employees need to come back into the office 5 days a week, which to me is a head scratcher, because here's a company that essentially distributes packages all over the world, where the whole focus of their business is the supply chain and the ability to get their tentacles into every neighborhood in the world. Yet they're trying to centralize some functions and mandating that people need to come back into those central functions. To me, that's a monstrous head scratcher. But what we'll always see in situations like this is that the headline makers, in magazines and newspapers, will go for the clickbait headlines, and you're far more likely, if most people are moving towards a distributed workforce, it's a lot easier to get people to click on the article when you start talking about a return to office mandate. So I would encourage people to just be a little bit wary that if you get triggered by a particular headline or a story about one particular company, that's probably by design. And you need to look at the underlying facts. Like, It might be that 9 companies are quietly going in one direction, and one company has stepped out of line to do something, and you're made to think that that one company is emblematic of the whole industry. And guess what? The data, and this is where you need to look at academically produced, peer-reviewed data that has a long time span. Again, we go back to the work WFH research type data and the Flex report type data. So I would look at that rather than clickbait headlines. So be very careful. And look, we're all guilty of it. Jumping online, going onto LinkedIn, saying, "Oh, I can't believe this company's doing this." L'Oreal, classic one last week. L'Oreal, unfortunately, the CEO of L'Oreal was platformed and given the opportunity at the World Economic Forum to essentially trash all aspects of remote work, and saying that remote workers lack productivity and creativity. Not a shred of data in that. But guess what? It garnered a disproportionate number of headlines, or amount of sort of mind space. And I think all of us need to be less triggered and more data centric.
I agree with you completely. And sometimes to me, it feels like, and I've definitely had some interesting conversations over the last few weeks, there is something about companies that partially have knowledge workers and partially have on-site workers. And I think there's something there where, there is the fear of, if they give the freedom to the knowledge workers, then the on the production floor,
Yep.
factory floor workers will be unhappy. So therefore, because we can't give it to everyone, we therefore shall give it to no one. And this whole discussion of unfairness comes in. And my feeling is that's what's happening with L'Oreal. That's what's happening with UPS. That's what's happening probably with a lot of companies.
So it's very interesting that you raised that point, because if you think of the payroll policy, salary structures and payroll policies for most companies, it differs department by department. It differs function by function. It differs based upon your experience. So why would you have? We all accept that. We know that. That's reality. So why would we bludgeon everybody with a one size fits all in terms of where you work? So, let's kind of, and that's evolved over time. So kind of lean in. And I mean, like, the other thing is, cool your jets here for a second. We're barely 4 years in to a cataclysmic change in how we operate. It took about 100 years to work out how to really fine tune how to work in offices. We're 4 years in. Massive amount of progress made. Chill out. Small steps. We're getting there. There's been 30 or 40 years of change happened in 4 years. Keep the eye on the prize. Keep thinking of 2030 to 2035 and the likelihood of where your company can get to and where you can bring your organization. And don't worry about losing some of the smaller battles. It's the long-term planning is the smart thing to do. And ultimately, this distributed work concept is not going to go away. What's likely to go away is these exhortations from senior leaders in companies that are opinion-based rather than data-based. And I think we're seeing that now, and we're going to see more of it.
And that's why you and I decided to. That's why you and I decided to do this a year ago, to kind of call on that. Let's not use any profanities, but call on this for not being accurate and for being an opinion. But just to finish off, a quick one from Unleashed, and it occurs to me, like, in the last 39 minutes that you and I have spoken about, what we've talked a lot more about is flexible work rather than remote hybrid in office. And that's actually something that Unleash has picked up on, by realizing maybe the conversation is moving away from this location kind of language into freedom language, and flexibility happens to
Yeah.
encompass this better. So there's the article is titled "Will Workers Become the Flexetariat in 2024?" Kind of playing words with proletariat. It's a fascinating read. Another thing that definitely recommend everyone to read. But quickly on it, what stood out for you? What do you believe that in this language change of moving away from remote, hybrid, in office, what have you, and on to flexibility and flexible work?
Yeah, I believe the language that we use is important, and I believe that we got off to a bad start by only referring to this distributed work as remote work, because remote is a triggering term, but it's kind of part of the lexicon of this whole kind of distributed work is remote work. So it's kind of interchangeable, but remote work or flexible work or distributed work, there's aspects of it that mean the same thing, and there's aspects of it that are completely different. So what the Unleash report says is that, and we know this, we've said this many times before, is that the remote work trends have stabilized, and return to office is not gaining momentum. Fact. What it also says is remote work, as in, over the last 5 years, remote work has grown 5x from 2019 to 2024. We know that. We've said it many, many times. What Nick Bloom and others have said, and it's accentuated in this Unleash report, is that 2023 was the year where it all flattened out. And what Nick Bloom and other researchers have said is they believe it's the portend of what's going to come, which is the Nike swoosh growth. So we've plateaued in the mid 20% range of the number of work days that are done from home, and that's going to increase from there. The third big tell in this is that employers are more and more employers are recognizing, let's call it location flexibility benefits, whether that is employee satisfaction increasing, whether it's the fact that productivity is increasing, whether it's the cost reduction is more beneficial, or whether their overall turnover and retention stats are improving. So that's a key point. Employees are more and more recognizing that. And the last one, I suppose, is there's a lot more research being done and will continue to be done on the competitive advantage of flexibility, and folks are academics looking at the underlying financial statistics of companies that have adopted more flexible work. And the early indications are that the more likely you are to adopt flexible work and incorporate it into your overall workforce, the better it's going to be in terms of profitability. So perish the thought, Irina, but oh my God, we're going to look at data ultimately. And that's what the Unleash report underpins, is data trumps opinions every single day.
That's it. And yeah, we should start looking at data more, which is again why you and I started this, and that's the hope. John, thank you very much. I am aware that you have a plane to catch to do your little remote work staycation vacation. But thank you so much for this. As always, opinionated, but with data, which is the best kind. This is all we have time for today. Again, we'll be sharing all of these articles in the Coda doc that we keep updating. You can look back at any of the previous episodes and everything that we've shared there. And I will see you in February.
Great stuff. Thanks a million, Irina. Take care.
Take care, John.